Kedo is typically translated as but, and kara is typically because. But there are some situations where you can use both, and that's confusing for some people. So let me explain. First, kedo as but. Let's say you're planning to go to comic market, but the weather forecast says it's going to rain. Your friend might use ame, rain, iku to go, and say, ame da kedo iku? It's going to rain, but are we going? And here, kedo pretty much means but. And you can use もちろん, of course, and say もちろん行くよ. Of course we are going. And that's pretty straightforward. Now let's use から with this. You can say 休みを取る to take a day off and say もちろん行くよ. 休み取ったから. Of course I'm going because I took a day off. And it's true that a lot of Japanese people work long hours, but it's still most of the time possible to take a day off because we are not crazy. We're just a bunch of masochists. But so far, kedo and kara are pretty straightforward. But we also use kedo to introduce some background information. For example, you can use 旅行, trip, お土産, souvenir, and say 旅行行くけど、お土産いる? I'm going on a trip. Do you want a souvenir? And here, kedo simply introduces some background information or some context. And you might ask, well, what if I didn't use kedo and just say 旅行行く、お土産いる? And the answer is the sentences don't really flow that well, unless you add some dramatic pause and say 旅行行く. I'm going on a trip. お土産いる? Do you want a souvenir? But generally speaking, in this kind of situation, we tend to use connectors like kedo in Japanese and say 旅行行くけどお土産いる? Because we don't want to finish every sentence, so we just keep going without finishing a sentence like never-ending One Piece episodes. Now, here, we generally don't use kara and say 旅行行くからお土産いる? Because in this context, it sounds like you are trying to justify why you are buying a souvenir. And at the same time, you're asking this question to your friend. So it doesn't quite fit the context, but in a slightly different situation. For example, if you say something like, 旅行行くからお土産買ってこようか? How about I buy some souvenirs since I'm going on a trip? And now it sounds fine because it's more like, okay, I'm gonna do this since I'm going on a trip. So I would say justifying kind of makes sense. And you can also use kedo and say 旅行行くけどお土産買ってこようか? And if you use kedo, it doesn't sound like you're justifying your choice. It's just some background information. So that's the difference. So in many situations, you can use both, but they have different nuances. For example, let's think of a situation where you're trying to ask somebody out. If you use kara and say 美味しいレストランあるから行かない? Because there's a good restaurant, do you want to go? It sounds like you're trying to justify your asking out. So if you're not used to asking out somebody because your crush doesn't love you back, this might work because you might need some kind of justification. But if you use kedo and say 美味しいレストランあるけど行かない? There's a good restaurant, do you want to go? It sounds more like you're comfortable asking that person out, because you don't need any justification. Hey, there's a good restaurant, do you want to go? Now with kedo, it's also very common to end the sentence using です and say ですけど. For example, if you go to a restaurant, you can say 予約したんですけど I have a reservation, and let the other person finish the sentence, because in Japanese, we prefer letting somebody else finish your sentence so that if they misinterpret, we can blame them. And if you go to a train station and don't know which train to take, you can ask, すいません、原宿に行きたいんですけど. Excuse me, I want to go to Harajuku. And the staff member will know that you're looking for the right train. Now, there's another way of using kedo, like though in English. For example, you can use 意見, opinion, and say, ま、ただの意見ですけどね. Well, it's just an opinion though, which isn't necessarily my favorite expression because it sounds a bit passive-aggressive. Like, if you have an opinion, you should own it. But you can say something like, Solo Leveling isn't even a good anime. and add まあ、ただの意見ですけどね。Well, it's just an opinion though, except it's not. It's objectively not so good. Now, some people ask about だ and say だから or だけど, but this is just simple grammar. When you use nouns or not adjective, you simply just add だ. Like 雨だけど行く It's going to rain, but do you want to go? And 雨, rain, is a noun, so you mechanically just add だ. So it doesn't really have any meanings here. And with だから, it's the same thing because you can just say 雨だから行かない. I'm not going because it's raining. And here again, 雨 is a noun, so I just said だから. And with not adjectives like 大事, important, it's the same thing. I'm gonna use お金 money and 健康 health and say お金も大事だけど健康も大事 Money is important, but health is also important. So it's pretty simple. And if you want to learn Japanese for practical purposes, like communicating with Japanese people or watching anime with a lot of culture, you can subscribe to my email group because I have both free and paid lessons where you can acquire Japanese with natural but easy examples. So click on the link in the description or on the screen and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta.